Wait, he mocked her, but used her branding and invited her? That's not accidental, right?
Some people leave with nothing. That was the line my ex chose for his wedding toast. Not privately, not by accident, not whispered to a friend after too much champagne. Into a microphone. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. In front of 100 people, and then he pointed at me. You ever have one of those moments where the whole room turns at once and you can actually feel the weight of other people's eyes hit your skin? That was what it felt like. 1 second. The reception room at Vale Vineyard was warm and glowing, full of candlelight and soft music, and those fake perfect smiles people wear at expensive weddings. The next, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the place. "She has nothing," Ethan said, smiling into his glass like he'd just delivered the cleverest line of the night. And people laughed. Not everyone. But enough. Enough for it to sting if I'd come there unprepared. Enough for his bride, Sophia, to let out a small, automatic laugh too until she looked at me properly. That was the first crack. Because I didn't react, I didn't gasp, I didn't cry, I didn't storm out, I didn't throw a drink in his face, even though I'm sure half the room expected me to. I just stood there in a black dress near the back of the reception hall, one hand around my clutch, watching him the way you watch someone walk farther onto ice that's already starting to split under their feet. And that's when Sophia's smile disappeared. You want to know the strangest part? I wasn't even supposed to be the one caught off guard that night. He was, because I had not shown up at that wedding to make a scene. I hadn't come for revenge. I hadn't come because I missed him, and definitely not because I still loved him. That part of my life had burned out a long time ago. The slow, ugly way things do when trust doesn't shatter in one moment, it erodes piece by piece, until one day there's simply nothing left to save. No. I came for one reason. I was invited. That's what made the whole thing so surreal. 3 weeks earlier, I had opened my mailbox after a long day and found a cream-colored envelope with gold edging, my full name written in formal calligraphy across the front, Miss Lena Hart. Inside was a wedding invitation so expensive it practically announced itself before I even unfolded it. At the bottom were the names, Sophia Vale and Ethan Cole, no handwritten note, no explanation, no apology, no warning. Just an invitation. I remember standing there in my apartment kitchen, staring at it while the kettle whistled behind me. For a full minute, I honestly thought it had to be a mistake, some twisted administrative accident. But Ethan was careful. Always careful when appearances mattered. He didn't do accidents. He did strategy. And that invitation felt like strategy. So I asked myself the obvious question. Why would a man who spent the last year of our relationship trying to erase me from his life, and, if I was being honest, from our shared history, want me sitting in the audience on the most polished day of his new one? The answer didn't come right away. But I had a feeling it wasn't kindness. Ethan and I had been together for 4 years, long enough to build routines. Long enough to know each other's coffee orders, stress tells, and favorite lies. Long enough to build something that mattered. That was the part almost no one at that wedding understood. They thought I was just the ex, the old chapter, the emotional debris before the glow-up, before the rebrand, before the rich, beautiful bride and the curated success story. But Ethan and I had shared more than a lease and a bed. We had built a company, or at least that's how it started. It began in a one-bedroom apartment with bad lighting and a folding table we used as a desk. He was good with people, confident, articulate, persuasive in a way that made investors lean in. I was the one who stayed up until 2 in the morning refining concepts, building frameworks, designing the identity, solving the problems nobody else could even see yet. He loved being the face of things. I didn't mind being the structure under them. At first, it worked, until it didn't. Until we slowly became him in every conversation. Until meetings happened without me. Until decisions were made before I heard about them. Until one day I realized Ethan had started introducing my work as if it had simply appeared around him, fully formed with no fingerprints except his own. That was the beginning of the end, though I didn't admit it then. Love makes smart women negotiate with things they should walk away from. Trust makes you sign papers you should read twice. Exhaustion makes manipulation sound almost reasonable. By the time we broke up, I was too drained to fight the way I should have. And Ethan knew it. Which is why, when I stepped out of my car at Vale Vineyard that evening and saw the rows of white roses, the string lights, the valet line, and the polished black signs directing guests toward the reception, I already knew I was walking into a performance. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known until I stepped inside, was just how much of me was built into it. The logo hit me first. Small, elegant, printed on the welcome display near the entrance. I stopped walking. Most people would have missed it. It was subtle, just a monogram worked into the event branding, the kind of detail that reads as luxury but disappears into the overall aesthetic. But I knew every line of it, every proportion, every curve, because I had designed it, not for a wedding, for the company. For the brand Ethan had spent the last year pretending he built without me. My chest tightened, not with heartbreak, but with clarity. That was when I understood this wasn't just an invitation. It was a message. A dare, maybe? Come watch, Lena. Come watch me celebrate a life built on the version of the story where you never mattered. And for a while, that's exactly what I did. I walked in. I smiled politely when people stared too long. I ignored the whispers. I took my seat near the back. And when Ethan finally spotted me across the room, he didn't look surprised. He looked pleased, like he had been waiting for this, like he had planned for this. And as the night went on, I began to understand that he hadn't invited me because he wanted closure. He had invited me because he wanted an audience. But then the toast began. Then the laughter started. Then Sophia turned pale. And when she looked at me, really looked at me, and took one step forward, her expression changed in a way I will never forget. Because suddenly, the only person in that room who seemed more shocked than the guests was the bride. And then she said, "Wait, your introduction finished." You ever walk into a room and realize you're the only one who knows the truth? That's what it felt like the moment I stepped into that vineyard. Hours before the toast, before the laughter, before Ethan decided to turn me into a punchline. Everything looked perfect. That was the first red flag. Golden sunlight spilled across the rows of vines, catching on glasses of champagne and polished shoes. The venue was the kind of place people posted about: white roses everywhere, soft instrumental music drifting through hidden speakers, staff moving like ghosts to keep everything seamless. It didn't feel like a wedding. It felt like a production. And Ethan had always loved a good production. I paused just inside the entrance, letting the scene settle around me. People were already watching. Not openly, no one wants to be obvious, but I caught the glances, the quick double takes, the subtle nudges. Is that her? I thought she moved. Why would she even come? Good question. I adjusted my grip on my clutch and kept walking. Confidence isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just choosing not to explain yourself. Lena? I turned slightly. Daniel. One of Ethan's old friends, the kind who had always hovered at the edge of our lives but never quite picked a side. "Hey," he said, awkward smile already forming. "Wow, I didn't expect, you didn't expect me to be here." I finished for him. He winced a little. "Yeah, I was invited." That stopped him. You could actually see the moment his brain tried to rearrange that information into something that made sense and failed. "Oh," he said, "I didn't know that. Most people don't," I replied. And that was the truth. Because whatever narrative Ethan had been telling over the past year, I clearly wasn't part of the version he'd shared with his new world. Daniel nodded, unsure what to say next, and drifted away. That was the pattern for most of the early evening brief interactions. Polite confusion, people trying to figure out whether I was a mistake or a statement. I let them wonder. Instead, I focused on the room. Details matter. They always have. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just a sign near the seating chart. Clean, minimalist, elegant, but something about it pulled my attention. I stepped closer, pretending to check the table assignments, and then it clicked. The design, the typography, the spacing. It was mine. Not copied, not inspired. Mine. A strange kind of stillness settled over me as I looked around more carefully. The menu cards, same visual language. The welcome boards, the printed programs. Even the subtle branding woven into the stage backdrop behind the head table, all of it followed a system I had built. Not for a wedding, for a company. You ever get that feeling where the past suddenly overlaps with the present in a way that doesn't quite make sense? Where something you thought was over is suddenly everywhere? That was what this was. And just like that, the invitation made a different kind of sense. This wasn't random. This wasn't sentimental. This was deliberate. I moved deeper into the venue, slower now, taking it all in. The conversations around me blurred into background noise as memory started filling in the gaps. Late night sketching a brand concept. Ethan pacing the apartment, rehearsing pitches while I refined visuals and systems behind the scenes. The first time we printed that logo, my logo, onto a mock-up, both of us staring at it like it meant something bigger than we could explain. Back then, it did. Back then, it was ours. So how exactly had it ended up here? At his wedding, celebrating a life that, according to him, I had no part in? I picked up a menu card from an empty table and turned it over slowly. Same mark, same structure, no credit, no acknowledgement. Just absorption. A quiet, unsettling thought slipped in. If this is everywhere, then what else is? That's when I felt it. That shift you can't see, but you know it's there. I looked up, and across the room, Ethan was staring at me. He hadn't been a moment ago, but now he was. And he wasn't confused. He wasn't annoyed. He was smiling. Not warmly, not nostalgically, sharply, like someone watching a plan unfold exactly the way they expected it to. He lifted his glass slightly in my direction, not enough for anyone else to notice, just enough for me to understand. He knew I'd seen it. He knew I'd recognize it. And, more importantly, he knew I'd stay. Because now I needed to understand how far this went. That smile didn't say, welcome. It said, let's see what you do. I held his gaze for a second longer than necessary, then set the menu card back down like it meant nothing. But inside, something had already shifted. Because whatever story Ethan was telling everyone else, I was starting to realize it wasn't just incomplete. It was constructed. And if he had gone this far to maintain it, if he had built an entire wedding around something that wasn't fully his, then this night wasn't going to end the way he thought it would. Not even close. Across the room, Ethan turned away first, already being pulled into another conversation, another laugh, another moment where he got to be exactly who everyone believed he was. But I stayed still for a second longer, watching, waiting, because one thing was suddenly very clear. He hadn't invited me by accident. He had invited me to witness something. The only question was, did he think I would stay silent? Or did he think I couldn't prove anything? And as the music shifted and guests began taking their seats for the reception, I realized something else. He wasn't the only one who had planned ahead. So here's the question. When someone tells a story about you, one that isn't true, how long do you let them keep talking? By the time Ethan podnal his glass for the toast, the room was already leaning toward him. That was always his strength. Attention. He didn't demand it, he drew it in, controlled it, shaped it. And tonight, he had everything working in his favor, the lighting, the setting, the audience, the narrative, even the bride. Sophia stood beside him, radiant, composed, one hand lightly resting on his arm. From the outside, they looked like certainty, like success, like the kind of couple people quietly compare themselves to and fall short. And Ethan? He looked exactly like the man everyone believed he was. Confident, self-made, untouchable. I stood near the back, just close enough to hear everything clearly, just far enough to not be part of the center. Or at least that's how it was supposed to be. First, Ethan began, lifting his glass slightly, his voice smooth, practiced. I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight. Light applause. Easy, expected. He smiled, glancing at Sophia. This day, it's been a long time coming. Soft laughter, a few approving nods. So far, perfect. But then just slightly his tone shifted. Not enough for everyone to catch it, but enough for me. You know, he continued, pacing just a step like he used to when rehearsing pitches in our apartment, people see something like this and they think it happens overnight. Pals, they see the result, the success, the stability. Another pause, longer this time. They don't see the years of work behind it, the risks, the decisions. His eyes flickered across the room and then briefly landed on me. There are people who walk beside you during those years, he said, voice tightening just a fraction. But not everyone who's there actually builds anything. There it was, subtle enough to pass as reflection, sharp enough to land exactly where he wanted it to. I felt a few glances shift toward me, uncertain now. Not laughing, not yet, just recalibrating. Because he hadn't named me, but he didn't need to. That's something you learn the hard way, Ethan continued. You learn who's really contributing and who's just along for the ride. A couple of people chuckled softly. The narrative was forming. Clean, simple, believable. I could almost see it settling into place in their minds. Ethan, the builder. Ethan, the one who carried everything. Ethan, who outgrew the wrong people and found the right one, Sophia. And me? Background noise. A phase. Disposable. I kept my expression neutral, but internally I tracked every word, every omission, every distortion. Because here's the thing, lies don't need to be loud to be effective. They just need to be consistent. And sometimes, Ethan said, lifting his glass a little higher now, confidence growing as the room stayed with him, you have to make hard choices. He turned toward Sophia, smiling again, softer this time. You have to let go of what's holding you back so you can build something real. Applause. Warmer now. Sophia smiled up at him, but there was a flicker there. Quick, almost invisible. Doubt. Then Ethan turned back to the room, and that's when everything snapped into place. Because at the end of the day, he said, voice steady, deliberate, some people leave your life a pause long enough to draw everyone in with absolutely nothing. And then he pointed straight at me. She has nothing. This time, the reaction was immediate. Laughter. Not hesitant, not confused. Clear. Defined. Final. A few people even turned fully in their chairs to look at me, like I was part of the entertainment now, like this was expected, planned, acceptable. Phones shifted. Subtle recordings began. And Ethan? He smiled. like he had just sealed the story. But here's where it broke. Because Sophia didn't laugh the second time. Not really. Her smile came a beat too late. Her eyes stayed on me a second too long, and then she leaned toward him, her voice low, but I was close enough to read it on her lip. You said she wasn't involved. Ethan didn't look at her. She wasn't, he said quickly. Too quickly, and that was it. That was the crack. Small, but real. Because Sophia wasn't stupid. And something about the way he said that, it didn't match the confidence he'd just performed for everyone else. Her gaze shifted back to me, slower this time, more deliberate, like she was seeing me for the first time, not as the ex, not as a joke, not as a leftover piece of someone else's past, but as a variable that didn't fit. The room was still laughing, but she wasn't part of it anymore. She straightened slightly, her hand slipping off Ethan's arm without him noticing at first. And then she stepped away from him. One step, then another. The laughter started to fade as people noticed conversations stalled, because now the bride was moving, not toward the guests, not toward the stage, toward me. Each step quieter than the last, but somehow louder than everything that had just happened. Ethan finally turned, confusion flashing across his face. Sophia? He said under his breath, but she didn't answer him. Her eyes stayed locked on mine. And when she stopped just a few feet away, the entire room felt like it was holding its breath. She studied me. Not casually, not socially. Carefully, like she was trying to solve something, and then, slowly, her expression shifted. Color draining, understanding creeping in, fear, real fear, flickering beneath the surface. Her voice, when she spoke, was quieter than Ethan's had been, but it cut through the silence far more cleanly. Wait. A pause, her brows pulled together slightly. You're... Funny how fast a room can turn, isn't it? 1 second. I was the punchline. The next, I was the question nobody could ignore. Sophia stood in front of me now, close enough that I could see the shift happening in real time. It wasn't dramatic, not loud, no gasps, no accusations, just a quiet unraveling behind her eyes as pieces that never quite fit together suddenly started to align. You're... she repeated, her voice softer this time, but tighter. And the room? Silent. Not the comfortable kind of silence either. This one had weight, the kind that presses down on conversations before they can even start. I tilted my head slightly, studying her the same way she was studying me. You didn't know? I asked. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rush the words. I let them sit exactly where they needed to. Confusion flickered across her face, quickly replaced by something sharper. She turned her head just enough to glance back at Ethan. He wasn't smiling anymore. That polished, untouchable confidence he'd been wearing all night, it slipped. Not completely, but enough. His jaw tightened, his shoulders squared in a way that wasn't relaxed anymore. It was defensive. Sophia, he said, stepping forward, his tone controlled but edged. This isn't. She didn't look at him. Not yet. Her attention snapped back to me. What didn't I know? She asked. Direct now. Good. I let a small pause stretch between us, not for drama, but because timing matters, because the difference between chaos and clarity is often just a few seconds of silence in the right place. Then I opened my clutch. You could feel the shift ripple through the room. It's strange how something so small, a simple movement, can suddenly carry so much attention. Conversations didn't just stop, they held. Every eye tracked what I was doing. Inside the clutch, everything was exactly where I'd placed it earlier that evening. Neatly folded, prepared, not as a weapon, but as a contingency. Because I hadn't come planning to use it, but I had come ready to... I pulled out the documents slowly, unfolding them just enough to make it clear they weren't random. Paper has a different kind of authority. It doesn't argue, it doesn't exaggerate, it just exists. What you're celebrating tonight, I said, finally meeting Sophia's gaze again, is built on something that didn't start the way you think it did. A murmur rippled faintly through the room, uncertain, cautious. Ethan stepped closer now, faster. Lena, he said, sharper this time, stop. I didn't even look at him, because for the first time all night, he wasn't the one in control of the conversation. I lifted one of the documents slightly, not high, not theatrically. Just enough. The company, I continued, my voice steady, the branding, the system behind it, all of it. I let the words land, was never his. That did it. The silence broke, but not into noise, into tension. You could hear people shifting in their seats, feel the discomfort spreading. This wasn't funny anymore. This wasn't entertainment. This was something else entirely. Sophia blinked once, like her mind was trying to reject what it had just heard. That's not Ethan started. Then explain it, she cut in, her voice still quiet but no longer uncertain. That was new. That was important. Because now this wasn't me versus him. This was her asking him to make sense. And he didn't have a clean answer ready. His eyes flicked toward the documents in my hand, then back to Sophia, calculating, adjusting, looking for an angle. It's complicated, he said finally. That was his mistake. Because complicated is what people say when the truth doesn't sound good out loud. I exhaled slowly. No, I said, it's actually not. And for the first time, I turned to look at him directly. Really look at him. You told everyone I walked away with nothing, I continued. But that's not what happened, is it? His expression hardened. You signed the papers. There it was. The version he'd been holding on to, the version he thought protected him. I signed drafts. I corrected calmly. Documents you said were temporary. Internal restructuring. A few heads in the crowd turned, now people who understood what those words actually meant. People who were starting to connect dots. Sophia's gaze snapped back to him. What is she talking about? Ethan's composure cracked just slightly. It's old stuff. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. The phrase hung in the air like a bad decision. I lifted another page, letting the edge catch the light. It matters, I said, because you never filed the final transfer. That landed hard. Even people who didn't fully understand the legal side of things understood enough to know that filing meant something real, something measurable, something provable. Sophia took a small step back. From him, not from me. Ethan, she said slowly, her voice thinning. What does that mean? He didn't answer immediately. And in that hesitation, everything shifted. Because now, it wasn't about what I was claiming. It was about what he couldn't deny. I held her gaze. Steady. Clear. You married him, I said, each word precise, without knowing who actually built the foundation of everything you're standing on. A beat. No one moved. No one spoke. And for the first time since the night began, Ethan looked like a man who had just realized he was no longer controlling the outcome. What actually happened? That was the question hanging in the air now. Not whispered, not implied, demanded. Sophia didn't raise her voice when she asked it, but she didn't need to. The way she stood there, a step removed from Ethan now, her entire posture shifted. It forced an answer. What does she mean? She said again, looking directly at him. This time, he couldn't dodge it. The room had changed sides, not in loyalty, but in attention. No one was laughing anymore. No one was filming for entertainment. They were watching for truth. And Ethan knew it. It's being twisted, he said, finally. Controlled, measured. Trying to rebuild ground that was already giving way. She's leaving out context. I let out a small breath, not a laugh, Not quite. Then add it, I said. Simple. Direct. Because if there was context that helped him, this was his moment to use it. He didn't. Instead, his silence stretched just long enough to confirm what mattered. So I spoke. Not louder, just clearer. We started the company together, I said, shifting my attention to Sophia, but making sure the room could hear every word. 4 years ago. The concept, the structure, the branding, that was my work. Ethan handled outreach, pitching, networking. A few subtle nods in the crowd. People who recognized the division. People who had seen this dynamic before. We registered it early, I continued. Before investors, before expansion, legally. I lifted the top document slightly. In my name. That landed differently. Heavier. More concrete. Sophia's face changed again, not confusion this time, but realization beginning to take shape. Ethan exhaled sharply. That's not the whole story. No, I agreed. It's not. And then I gave it to them. The whole story is that when things started growing, Ethan wanted control shifted, said it would look cleaner to investors, more standard. I made a small gesture with my fingers around the word. He brought me documents, internal restructuring agreements. Temporary, he said, just to prepare for formal filings. I paused, letting that sink in. I trusted him, I added. No dramatics, no accusation, just fact. And I signed. There it was, the piece he'd been holding on to all night. Ethan seized it immediately. Exactly, you signed them. But this time, it didn't land the way he expected. Because now, the room was listening differently. Drafts, I said, meeting his eyes. Not finalized transfers. Silence again. The final filings, I continued, holding up another page, were never completed, never submitted, which means legally the ownership never changed. I let that settle fully before finishing. I still hold majority control. That was the moment everything broke. Not loudly, but completely. You could see it ripple outward, guests exchanging looks, subtle shifts as people recalculated what they thought they knew. One of the men near the front, an investor I vaguely recognized, pulled out his phone, already typing something with a very different kind of urgency. Sophia took another step back. This time, there was no hesitation. You told me it was yours, she said to Ethan, her voice tight, controlled, but shaking underneath. It is, he started. Don't, she cut in. That single word stopped him colder than anything else had. Because now she wasn't asking, she was drawing a line. What else don't I know, she asked. And there it was. Not just about the company anymore. About everything. Ethan looked at her, searching for something, sympathy, alignment, anything, but there was nothing there to grab onto. Just distance. Around us, the room was unraveling in quieter ways. Conversations breaking into smaller clusters, people stepping away, the celebration atmosphere draining out like air from something punctured. One of the venue coordinators hovered uncertainly near the edge, unsure whether to intervene or disappear. The investors didn't leave. They stayed, watching. Because now this wasn't a wedding. It was a liability. I shifted slightly, lowering the documents. I filed an injunction 2 weeks ago, I said, calm, steady, to prevent unauthorized use of the brand and asset. That pulled attention back sharply. Ethan's head snapped toward me. You what? It's already in process, I continued, which means any current representation of ownership is under review. The investor near the front stepped forward slightly. We'll need to verify all of this immediately, he said, more to Ethan than to me. Translation: this isn't over, and it's not staying private. Sophia closed her eyes for a brief second, then opened them again, clearer. Caller, we're done talking about this here, she said, then corrected herself almost instantly. No, actually, we're not. She looked at Ethan one last time. You should have told me the truth. Not loud. Not dramatic. Finale. Then she stepped away from him completely. That was the moment the wedding ended. Not officially, but in every way that mattered. Later that night, the lights were still on, but the energy was gone. Half the guests had left early. The rest lingered in awkward pockets, conversations low and cautious. Staff had started clearing tables that were supposed to last another 3 hours. I stepped outside into the cool night air, the quiet almost jarring after everything inside. For the first time all evening, I let my shoulders drop slightly. Not in victory. Not in relief, exactly. Just release. A notification buzzed on my phone. Then another. I glanced down. An email from my legal team. Confirmation received. Proceedings moving forward as planned. Another message followed this one from an unknown number. This is Daniel Reed from Crestline Ventures. We need to speak directly. I stared at the screen for a second, then locked it. Behind me, through the glass, I could still see movement fragments of what had been a carefully constructed night, now coming apart in real time. Ethan wasn't visible anymore. Sophia was standing across the room, no longer at the center, just another person trying to process what her life had just shifted into. I didn't go back inside. There was nothing left for me there. Everything that needed to be said had been said. Everything that needed to surface had. I walked toward the edge of the vineyard, the distant rows fading into darkness, the noise behind me growing quieter with every step. She has nothing. The words replayed once in my mind, then faded, because they were never true. Not then. Not now. And not in any version of the story that actually held up when it mattered. By the time I reached my car, the night felt still again. Not empty. Just reset. And as I drove away, leaving the lights of the vineyard behind me, one thing was clear. I hadn't walked into that wedding to take anything back. I had walked in to let the truth stand on its own. And it did.
So, was this revenge, or was he betting she'd never prove it?